And normally these guys send down their talking points, everybody regurgitates them. The left has their fake points, the right has their points. We're just here for freedom and liberty and historical facts. The Fed's outlook, they have come out and said that they think that the country is basically going into a serious crisis, and their outlook has been downgraded. There's now a triple dip, they're saying, in the housing market. I told you 3 years ago, from all the economists I talked to in my own research, we were in a depression then. But as long as they keep telling you with the PSYOP everything's fine, well, then there's not a problem. And as Jesse Ventura said on my show today, people aren't protesting Wall Street and the free market. The media is spinning it that way. They're protesting certain elements of Wall Street, i.e. the Federal Reserve's buy-off and hijacking of Congress, of our government, and their new super Congress. So that's what's happening on that front. And we've got another report here. You know, you've seen more than 100 cases, even mainstream media has had to admit that it's all fake, where they go get some prison convict or some mentally retarded person and give them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they'll dress up in a uniform and they'll say, I'll give you 50,000 more if you talk about blowing up the Miami FBI building. Remember that case? But the black Rastafarian potheads they said were Muslims, it was all fake a few years ago. Well, now they've moved on to 70 and 75 and older geriatrics you know, talking them in to just shooting their mouths off while they're drinking beer about blowing up the government. They got one guy, Frederick Thomas, to talk about a novel he read written by a Fox News reporter where the government is poisoned with ricin. And boom, they admit that the government gave him the bomb, everything else. So, listen, I've been at DVD signings, at films I've shown. I've been at book signings, at book people here in Austin. I've been at events. And there's always an off-duty cop walks over and says, hey, let's attack, let's blow up things. And I go, you're a cop. I followed them outside and seen their unmarked police car. I had State Department diplomatic security, Marine Corps intelligence, come up when I was eating dinner at the Hyatt outside the Bilderberg meeting. It was a few miles away, and say, let's attack the State Department. And I said, you're giant 45-year-old, 250-pound, muscle-bound assassins. You're obviously cops with high and tight haircuts. And they're like, well, we're just checking to make sure everything's all right. But they were first, let's attack the State Department together. You know, this is the, and if they find some old drunk go, yeah, let's do it. It's like, ladies and gentlemen, we stopped a major attack today. My goodness, we're so lucky. Here's the headline. Feds online novel played role in Georgia militia plot. And who is it? Couple 70-plus-year-old gentlemen, deadly. There are actually a lot of deadly 70-year-old men. I guess they've got a point in a way. Evil veterans. Continuing, sheriff has come out who's in Arizona, Sheriff Paul Babu, and he has said that Fast and Furious is a bigger scandal than Watergate, and Attorney General Eric Holder got caught again testifying he knew nothing about it, even when he gave press conferences 2 years ago admitting they were running this. So he's been caught, as we've shown in past transmissions here, and others have been caught in absolute, total, and complete 110% perjury. And Babu has also said Holder should resign because of Fast and Furious, and a whole bunch of, well, over 24 Republicans have called for that as well. The only problem is they don't really need to resign because, as Issa has admitted, the Republicans were involved in this pre-Obama. This has never stopped. Drugs are allowed to be shipped in. Certain cartels are shipped guns to knock out their competition. It's a $500 billion a year industry. You better bet big global banks are involved running it, and they've been proven running it. That's come out. Okay, continuing. How do you stop it? Total drug decriminalization today. Not that I use any of that stuff. I've studied history. I know that the mobsters tripled their profits, corruption expanded, the police got corrupted during alcohol prohibition for 9.5 years. Now, let's go ahead and get to overpopulation. There's all these different groups coming out saying the population in the next 50 years is going to hit, 15 billion or whatever, 14 billion. But all the UN's own actuaries say it planes off at 8.5 to 9 billion in 2024. And because of the aging population, if you don't have 2 adults who have 2 children, there's no one to take care of them or pay for their Social Security. The same thing that third worlders know, hey, I want a bunch of kids to take care of me when I get old. Well, it's the same thing when you have a monetary system. You need 2 people to pay in for every 2 people that are about to go into retirement. And we have the 5th episodes of PRI's popular Population 101 series. We aired a few of these earlier in the week. This video takes a fresh, humorous approach to the demographic issues facing the world today. Be sure to copy the video, and it's got a link to it on YouTube. And so we're going to play this clip by this research group that has put together this information and help you get it out to others. Here is that video. Population 101, 7 billion people. Will everyone please relax?
At some point in the year 2011, the Earth will hold 7 billion people on its surface, more people than any point in recorded history. While some welcome this latest member of humanity with excitement, others with fear. When people hear that we've been adding 1 billion people every 15 years, they imagine humanity's growth to look something like this. But 1 billion people isn't as high a percentage of humanity as it used to be. For instance, imagine this roller coaster car represents 1 billion people. If we add another car, or 1 billion more people, our train has doubled in length. But if we want to double the train again, we can't just add 1 more train car. We'd have to add 2. Every time we make the train longer, 1 train car represents a smaller and smaller percentage of the train. If it takes 15 years to add each new train car, then mathematically speaking, the growth rate is slowing. In order for the growth rate to stay constant, the train would have to keep doubling every 15 years, instead of just adding 1 car. Human population growth is the same way. In 1804, the world's population hit 1 billion. By 1927, that number had doubled. But by 1960, that number had only grown by half. By 1975, it was only growing by a third, and then a fourth, and then a fifth. To see how population growth is slowing down, we look at a number called the global total fertility rate, which is the average number of children each woman is having. And over the last 40 years, that rate has been rapidly falling. According to the UN's current data, the world's population is due to peak in 25 years. After it peaks, it will start to go down. By the end of the century, we'll be losing 1 billion people every 20 years. This year, the world's population will hit 7 billion. In 75 years, we'll be back here again. Think about it.
All right, so that's the Population Research Institute, and their information is 100% dead on. The UN even has these numbers. So the truth is, once you get a big population, they have a bunch of kids. Most of it's third worlds, they're having a bunch of kids. But now that's all slowed down, so the increase is slowing down. And then it actually turns into a nightmare 50 years from now as population starts actually going down. It's going to be basically like the U.S. worldwide or Japan, where there's just giant cities of old people and nobody to help them or take care of them. Of course, I guess they'll have robots or something, but it planes out at 8.5 billion. And then it starts going into decline. Instead, the globalists are cutting off all of our resources in the name of supposedly fixing things, and it does nothing but cause all sorts of social unrest, which they then use to take even more of our rights. This is eugenics. The elite want 90% of the population reduced conservatively. You know, some reports were 80%, now it's over 90. That's what the universities are putting out. Can you imagine 500 million people on the planet? That's a little more than the United States, basically. Okay, let's continue here. That's like 90% of the Chinese dead, 90% of the Indians dead, 90% of the Mexicans dead, 90% of the Americans dead, 90% of the Iranians dead, 90% of the Israelis dead, 90% of the Russians dead. Can I go on here? Let me break down a little bit more with this next clip, Population 101, the fact that to just replace 2 humans, you need 2.1 more at least to continue a civilization. See, once you have a big population, you've got to continue to have one or your existing population collapses. Here it is.
From the time of the cavemen all the way until today, humanity continues to exist because each generation of people has produced another generation to replace itself. Scientists have figured out how many people need to be born each generation to replace the generation before. That number is 1 person per person. All things being equal, this creates perfect demographic balance. Since women are the only ones who can have children, replacing every person on Earth means each woman needs to have 2 children, one to replace her, and the other to replace the man, who cannot have children. The total fertility rate is the average number of children each woman in a society is having. This number shows us if a society is growing or shrinking. In developed countries, the replacement rate birth rate is 2.1 children per woman. This will keep the population stable, but even that is assuming that every woman has children and that there are no wars, famines, or disease. In the real world, disasters happen all the time, and sadly not all children reach adulthood, especially in poor countries. This pushes their replacement rate up to 3.3 children per woman. Since not every woman wants to have children, in order to keep the population stable, some women need to have more than 2.1 children to balance the birth rate with the women who are only having 1 or no children at all. Maintaining this balance is of the utmost importance. If society does not at least replace itself every generation, human numbers begin to fall exponentially. Economic and social problems appear as elderly people retiring begin to outnumber young people entering the workplace. This is already happening all over the developed world. Many of the world's nations are only barely replacing themselves, while a growing majority have birth rates below replacement, some as low as 1.8 or even 1.2 babies per woman. Many societies are facing a very real danger: extinction.
You see, that's what's amazing about Planned Parenthood and all this. It's being enforced in the West that's dying. And by the West, I mean industrialized countries, Japan, United States, you name it. It's just incredible. And they know exactly what they're doing. Now, I want to hit 2 more articles on this front. Here is the Huffington Post, and they have the headline, "I am the population problem." And you got to love all these trendy women who say they don't want to have kids till they hit about 40 and then they're desperate to have them. But this is part of the lecturing. And I tell you, even when I was in college 20 years ago, most women were like, "I'm not having kids, it's bad for the earth." I mean, and then of course, by the time they hit 40 and are totally empty, they're absolutely unhappy. But this is the cult. I have 3 children. And I routinely, and my wife's had this happen, have trendies walk up in Whole Foods or other places and say, "How dare you have 3 children?" I mean, this is their religion, and they don't understand anything. It's a dangerous group of control freaks. But the state has always sought to take control of reproduction. Here's another report, though, and this is out of Peru, and it deals with the fact, the LA Times is reporting that more documents are coming out on the forced reduction of population and sterilization. And they've done this through vaccines as well. But they would also forcibly sterilize women. That's going to tie into our interview that's coming up later, dealing with what's happening in Canada. But this is something that's been going on for decade after decade all over the world in covert operations. Now, continuing here, finally, I want to get into the whole communist angle. Communism in the real political paradigm is created by the oligarch bankers to enslave the public in a communal system controlled by the state. Then the money is transferred offshore. But even in communist China, Mao Zedong's wife was put on house arrest for the rest of her life and actually put on trial. He was towards the end of his life. The Chinese themselves, their government says he killed